Hi and welcome to the session. Today's session is among the series of sessions regarding discourse studies, and in today's session we are going to talk about three-dimensional model of critical discourse analysis as expounded by Norman Fairglove. So before moving on to three-dimensional model, let's have a brief introduction about Norman Fairclough and what are his contribution in the field of critical discourse studies. Norman Fairclough is one of the most important and influential founders of critical discourse analysis (CDA) in the field of sociolinguistics. He is an emeritus professor of linguistics at Lancaster University in England. Fairclough is known as one of the prominent figures in the discussion of language, discourse, and society. He attempts to bring a relation between language, discourse, how language contributes or constitutes discourse, and how these discourses are related to society, social practices. He proposes the idea that language is a part of society. He says that language is not something which is isolated phenomena, something which is detached with society. And language is not just only a medium of communication. It has social implication in it. He further says that language and society is related not in external sense, rather they are related internally. So language and society are interdependent, interrelated, not from outside, rather they are internally interlinked with each other. In simple way, we can say that any linguistic phenomena reflect social phenomena, meaning that anything that is linguistically expressed, it actually reflects social phenomena or social practice. So language is a social process. And critical discourse analysis is concerned with the language analysis, with the analysis of language in its social context. CDA is concerned with how language permeates power and how power practices are reflected through the use of language. Critical discourse analysis is actually an interdisciplinary approach to the study of discourse that uses language as the source of social practice. Whenever we use language in order to constitute any discourse, our use of language is a communicative event. We attempt to communicate, we attempt to transmit our ideas, thoughts, opinion to someone else. So, in a way, when we use language, it becomes a communicative event. And language is something which is not a neutral phenomena. It is always vested. And it is used to create change, and it changes in behavior. It changes our behavior, how we think about society, how we take different ideas from the society. So ultimately, language creates change, and it changes the way we think or the way we progress in our society. And thirdly, language is a tool of power. Language is vested with power. language practices power. It is it is linked with society. It is linked with power. It reflects power. And critical discourse analysis, it is the analysis of language in order to understand the power structure used within the use of language. Critical discourse analysis stems from a critical theory of language which sees the use of language as a form of social practice. All social practices are tied to specific historical context and are the means by which existing social relations are reproduced or contested and different interests are served. It is the questions pertaining to interest, that how is the text positioned or positioning, whose interests are served by this positioning, whose interests are negated, what are the consequences of this positioning. All these relate discourse to relations of power. When we see that what are different positioning of discourses, then we are in a way attempting to understand the power relations within any discourse, where analysis seeks to understand how discourse is implicated in relation of power. It is called critical discourse analysis, meaning that whenever we attempt to probe power structures within the use of different discourse, it becomes a critical discourse analysis. So critical discourse analysis is always concerned with the analysis of language based upon power structures. Fairclough propounded his idea of critical discourse analysis with the help of three-dimensional model, and this model is actually the analysis of language, the analysis of the analysis of power structure, which is tied to three interrelated dimensions of discourse. And these three dimensions are text, discursive practice, social practice. So the first dimension, which he names text. Text, the object of analysis, and text can be a speech, writing, image, or all forms of communication. Here, the analysis is based on words level, like grammar, vocabulary, semantic, cohesion, etc. How and what types of words are used in sentences? Do these words have interconnection with each other? Are sentences cohesively constructed? Is there coherence or thematic harmony? What sort of attitude is represented through the use of words? So, the first dimension is all about text. Text and words, analysis on the words level. In the second dimension, which he names discursive practice, the processes by means of which the object is produced and received by human objects. So discursive practice is concerned with production of text or construction of text. Here, the analysis takes place at text level. Who has constructed discourse and for whom it has been produced. So, the discursive practice, which is the second dimension of 3D model, it is concerned with the construction of discourse and for whom the discourse has been produced. It is the construction and consumption of discourse. In the third dimension, which he calls social practice, it is concerned with the socio-historical conditions by which different discourses are generated. It is related to standards, norms, and values of society or the organization of discourse. In the third dimension, the analysis is carried out on the norms level. Norms which are given, which are constituted within a society. So, as we said that language or discourse is something which is a social practice. It is always related to society and social norms. So, in the third dimension, the analysis takes place on the norms level, where social norms and social values and social standards are probed in. According to Fairclough, each of these dimensions requires a different kind of an analysis. For example, in the first dimension, text requires analysis which he calls description. In the second dimension, discursive practice, processing analysis, here the analysis is based on interpretation. And in the third, social analysis, here the analysis becomes an explanation of socio-historical context of the discourse. What is useful about this approach or this model is that it enables us to focus on the signifiers that make up the text, the specific linguistic selections, their juxtapositioning, their sequencing, their layout, and so on. However, it also requires us to recognize that the historical determination of these selections and to understand that these choices are tied to the conditions of possibility of that utterance. What is important about this approach and this model is that it enables us to focus on the signifiers that make up the text, the specific linguistic selections, their juxtapositioning, their sequencing, their layout, and so on. So it focuses on text, the use of words, how they are interconnected, how they are cohesively and coherently constructed, and how they contribute to the whole. It also requires us to recognize that the historical determination of these selections and how to understand that these choices are tied to the conditions of possibility of that utterance. So it also makes us unable to see the socio-historical context of each discourse. Now we move on to these three dimensions and discuss in detail them in one by one, which are text, discursive practice, and social practice. So, first of all, text. As we know that discourse is collection of words, by using any discourse we express our attitude, our opinion, our liking and disliking. So whenever we say something we get help of different words, and the very selection of those words reflect our attitude towards the subject. Here this idea can be explained with example. For example, when we say something about a person and we use different words in order to express our opinion or our attitude towards that person, and the very selection of words demonstrate how we perceive or how we understand or how we explain that person. For example, if we say an honest man, the very selection of words honest reflects our attitude towards that person. Similarly, when we say a dubious person, a cunning fellow, so these are the words which are in a way attributes to our attitudes regarding that person, whether we can. अब हम नॉर्मन फेयरक्लव के थ्री डायमेंशनल मॉडल के अकॉर्डिंग एक स्पीच के एक एक्सट्रैक्ट को एनालाइज करने की कोशिश करते हैं. और ये स्पीच विच आई हैव सिलेक्टेड इज़ फ्रॉम इमरान खान्स recent speech regarding inflation in Pakistan. It is a short extract taken from his speech. और पहले हम देखते हैं, स्पीच को पढ़ते हैं और फिर हम उसको टेक्स्ट, डिस्क्रिप्शन और फिर डिस्कर्सिव प्रैक्टिस, इंटरप्रिटेशन और फिर फाइनली सोशल प्रैक्टिस, एक्सप्लेनेशन के अकॉर्डिंग इसको एनालाइज करने की कोशिश करेंगे. सबसे पहले इस एक्सट्रैक्ट को रीड आउट करते हैं. इमरान खान ने अपनी स्पीच में एक पोर्शन में कुछ इन्फ्लेशन से मुतल्लिक कुछ बात कही, जो वो कहते हैं द बिगेस्ट चैलेंज वी फेस टुडे इज़ इन्फ्लेशन एंड राइजिंग प्राइसेस ऑफ कमोडिटीज़. आई एम वेल अवेयर एंड cognizant of the issues being faced by the common man due to rising prices. There are two phases of inflation. When we came into government, we had to deal with the massive current account deficit. Due to this, the prices of imports soared drastically. That was at that time, and now the inflation is global because of कोरोना. जब हम फेयरक्लव के 3D मॉडल के अकॉर्डिंग इसको देखते हैं तो सबसे पहले हम टेक्स्ट और टेक्स्ट की डिस्क्रिप्शन को लेते हैं. हमें पता है कि फर्स्ट डायमेंशन इज़ एक्चुअली रिलेटेड टू द एनालिसिस विच इज़ बेस्ड ऑन वर्ड्स लेवल. अब हमने यहाँ पर सिर्फ वर्ड्स को देखना है कि चॉइस ऑफ वर्ड्स क्या है और कैसे ये जो वर्ड्स की सिलेक्शन है एक स्पेसिफिक एटीट्यूड रिप्रेजेंट कर रही है. ठीक है, सबसे पहले हम देखते हैं कि बिगेस्ट चैलेंज इन्फ्लेशन, राइजिंग प्राइसेस, massive current account deficit, prices of imports soared drastically. इन्फ्लेशन एज अ ग्लोबल इशू, कोरोना। सो यहाँ पर हमें ये समझ आ रही है कि जब हम वर्ड्स को देखते हैं और वर्ड्स किस तरह से एक दूसरे के साथ कनेक्टेड हैं, और अल्टीमेटली ये जो चॉइस ऑफ वर्ड्स है ये एक स्पेसिफिक एटीट्यूड को रिफ्लेक्ट कर रही है, ठीक है। और हमने यहाँ पर जब जब टेक्स्ट